For the last couple of months, Diddy has been the face of domestic violence, ex-trafficking, stalking, and all types of terrible abusive behavior. And rightfully so. I mean, he is an absolute monster and is finally getting his day in hell in the court of public opinion. But as many of us know, Diddy ain't the first, and he ain't the only monster to do these exact same things. Actually, those who love to praise our legendary artists from the past should really rethink their standing, because some of those same men did exactly what Diddy has, and Marvin Gaye was one of them. The stark similarities between P. Diddy and Marvin Gaye are quite unsettling, to say the least. They both have done very harmful things to young girls and women, and have practically gotten away with it, still seemingly having fans and support along the way. I am going to take you on a trip down memory lane and show you the evil parallels between P. Diddy and Marvin Gaye. Let's go. Ever since the earth-shattering lawsuit that Cassie Ventura, P. Diddy's ex-girlfriend of 10 years, released against him, we've been privy to his sick, abusive, depraved behavior towards women. In some of those cases, some of them hadn't even reached adulthood yet. In the one of many essay claims against Sean P. Diddy Combs, he has been accused of gang R-wording and ex-trafficking a 17-year-old schoolgirl when she was in the 11th grade, according to a new court filing. The accuser, who's referred to as Ms. Doe, alleges that when she was 17, she was drugged and R-worded by Diddy, his longtime lieutenant Harve Pierre, and another unnamed man back in 2003. She also alleges in the lawsuit that she was in high school and out with friends at a club in Detroit in 2003 when she first met Pierre, the former president of Diddy's Bad Boy Entertainment. Pierre told her she was hot and insisted that his best friend and brother P. Diddy would love to meet her. She says Pierre then called Diddy and put her on the phone with him, who told her she should fly to New York City with Pierre to come see him. She agreed to this, but alleges she was forced to give Pierre, who had been smoking crack cocaine, mouth service before they boarded a flight. Upon landing, she says, she was taken to Diddy's recording studio, where she was plied with drugs and alcohol by Diddy, Pierre, and the third assailant who'd been tagging along. Her filing reads, as the night wore on, the 17-year-old Ms. Doe became more and more inebriated, eventually to the point that she could not possibly have consented to having sex with anyone, much less someone twice her age. It claims that she was R-worded first in a bathroom at the studios by Diddy, who removed her underwear and forced himself on her as she hung over a sink. While at the studio, Ms. Doe was gang R-worded by Mr. Combs, the third assailant, and Mr. Pierre in that order, the filing alleges. While Mr. Combs was R-ring Ms. Doe, he complained that he could not get off unless she pinched his nipples as hard as she could. The filing also alleges, Mr. Combs then watched on as the third assailant, who Ms. Doe had not even realized had begun to have sex with her, R-worded Ms. Doe as she told him to stop. After third assailant was finished, Mr. Pierre took his turn at R-ring Ms. Doe and then violently forced her to give him mouth service, during which Ms. Doe was choking and struggling to breathe. When Mr. Pierre finished, he left Ms. Doe in the bathroom alone. Ms. Doe fell into the fetal position and lay on the floor. Her private area was in pain. She could barely stand up following the alleged gang assault and was helped into a car, which took her back to the airport. She doesn't really remember how she got back home to Detroit. And if true, this wasn't the first time P. Diddy was accused of drugging women and taking advantage of them alongside others males. It's been said that in 1990 or 1991, P. Diddy, known at the time as Puff Daddy, and R&B singer Aaron Hall, had brutally assaulted an underage 16-year-old girl and her friend. The woman, identified in the complaint as Liza Gardner, said she and a friend met Diddy and Aaron, who was a member of the R&B group Guy, at the record label's offices for an event MCA was hosting. The friend was not named as a plaintiff in the lawsuit, The suit alleges that Diddy and Aaron were very flirtatious and handsy with Liza Gardner and her friend, and offered them drinks throughout the event. Toward the end of the night, Diddy and Aaron invited Liza and her friend back to Aaron's apartment for an after-party. While at Aaron's apartment, Liza Gardner was offered more drinks and was coerced into having intercourse with Diddy. After he was finished doing his business, Liza Gardner laid in bed, shocked and traumatized. While she was trying to get dressed, Aaron allegedly barged into the room, pinned her down, and forced Liza Gardner to have sex with him. Following the alleged assaults, she got dressed and ran from the home. The lawsuit accuses both men of sexually assaulting Liza's friend that same evening as well. That upon information and belief, when Diddy was finished with Liza, he and Aaron switched, and they commenced assaulting Liza's friend. The lawsuit also alleges that days later, Diddy went to the home where Liza and her friend were staying, became irate, and allegedly assaulted and choked Liza until she passed out. It says that Diddy was allegedly looking for the friend because he feared she would tell the girl he was with at the time about what he'd done to her. Liza said she was 16 at the time and too young to consume alcohol legally or consent to sex. It says that Liza had been invited to New York and introduced to Diddy by close friends who were members of the group Jodeci. Now, what we heard here is absolutely terrible. How men in the entertainment industry are so okay with harming young girls. How they have flunkies who use their access to celebrities and money to seduce and ultimately strong-arm these impressionable women, bringing them to the depraved star to deal in their sick deeds. This is exactly what happened back in 1973 when 17-year-old Janice Hunter met her childhood crush, Marvin Gaye. According to Marvin Gaye's ex-wife, Jan Gaye's book, My Life with Marvin, she describes her first meeting with the star. According to Jan, music producer Ed Townsend, who worked on Marvin Gaye's hit Let's Get It On, was a friend of her mother Barbara, and he let the then 16-year-old know that he knew Marvin Gaye and that he could introduce them. Jan had a huge crush on Marvin Gaye since she was 8 years old. She fell in love with his music because to her, his music took away all the pain she was going through. You see, Jan had an unfortunately rough upbringing since she was 14 months. Being the product of a white teenage mother and a famous black jazz singer named Slim Gaylor, this biracial child was bound to have issues when the height of racism was happening. In this foster home, this Jan faced great harm for years. Marvin Gaye's music was her only escape until she was finally released back to her mother at age of 14. Ed Townsend told Jan he could get Marvin to perform at her 17th birthday party. When Marvin couldn't make it to her party, Ed took Jan to the recording studio where Marvin was recording his album. Now, Ed knew this was kind of inappropriate because he kept saying how Marvin was married, probably knowing that Marvin would be attracted to her. And he was right. Marvin, who was 34 and married to Berry Gordy's sister, Anna, was definitely taken by the girl. Soon after, Marvin took her on a date where he bribed the waiter $20 to give her 2 alcoholic drinks. Later on that night, when he was dropping her home, inebriated, she offered to let him in and she performed mouth service to him in the living room. Then even sooner, Marvin moved Jan into his homely 1-bedroom apartment that housed a crackhead by the name of Al on his couch. These were blaring red flags, but this young girl didn't recognize them. Her dream had come true, being with Marvin Gaye. But soon, this dream would become a nightmare. One of the most damaging things men will do is pit their women against each other to vie for their affections. P Diddy, who always had multiple women at a time, had a main chick, a model by the name of Kim Porter. Then he met Cassie, who was a 19-year-old up-and-coming singer who would soon take her place. According to blogger Cola Boof, Diddy viciously pitted Kim against Cassie. He especially used colorism and Cassie's mixed-race heritage against Kim, a black woman. Here's some of the disgusting things that Diddy did with these 2 women. Unfortunately, Cassie allowed herself to be put on a pedestal above Kim by indulging in Diddy's favoritism for her. She supposedly laughed at Diddy's mistreatment towards Kim and felt she was praised because she was younger and not black. She sat back and watched the mistreatment of Kim until she became Kim. Marvin Gaye did something very similar. Loving to play mind games and watch people's reaction in tough situations, he tried multiple times putting his older wife against his teenage girlfriend. One day after he picked Jan up from high school, he told her that he needed to pick his son up from his wife's house. This made Jan very uncomfortable and quite frankly scared. Even though she was young, she knew it was disrespectful for a mistress to go to the wife's house. She told Marvin that she felt very uncomfortable about this, in which he had a devilish smile and loved watching the fear creep on her face. Marvin's whole goal was to hurt Anna as well, to show his old aging wife, who was 17 years older than him, his brand new, younger, more attractive biracial girlfriend, his new trophy. Marvin went in the house and had Jan get out of the car they arrived in and into the Bentley that was at the home. These were Anna's cars, by the way. Jan was panicking inside, and she had every right to, because as Marvin was coming outside with his son, Anna was right behind him. Anna came storming to the car. Jan was petrified. She said Anna looked strong and scary. Anna banged on the window and told Jan to roll the window down. Jan refused. She only cracked it an inch. Anna looked at Jan in disgust and said, "I just wanted to see what someone like you looks like." Then she turned to Marvin, who seemed to be reveling in this interaction, and said, "Now that I've seen it, don't ever bring it back here again." Marvin enjoyed seeing Jan so frightened and upset. He loved that he set her up, and this is something he would continue to do throughout their relationship and worse. One of the most unsettling things about Cassie's lawsuit against Diddy is the fact that he had a perverse habit of wanting to watch her engage in sexual activity with other men. And the main requirement was that they had to have BBCs, big black cocks. He actually made Cassie go out and seek these male sex workers to engage in weekly freak-offs. Freak-offs were depraved activities where multiple men would have their way with Cassie in front of Diddy as he watched. Cassie did not want to do this, so Diddy kept her drugged up and intoxicated to get through this humiliation. Marvin Gaye did the exact same thing with Jan, who still hadn't even turned 18 yet. Marvin had an RV, and at night after his concerts, he and Jan would go down to the red light districts scoping out prostitutes. He'd tell her what kind he liked, usually the ones with big butts, which Jan herself didn't have, and made Jan bring them back to the RV. He made Jan watch as two prostitutes would service him. She didn't enjoy watching this, but she didn't want to lose her relationship with him. But she'd soon learn that trying to please Marvin would only cause her to get used in the degradation process. Soon, Marvin wanted to see two men with Jan. And before she knew it, Marvin would get his wish. Marvin found a couple that was checking Jan out. He invited them over to smoke pot and chill. When he noticed they seemed attracted to her, Marvin said, "I think they want to take this party to the next phase. A small intimate orgy is just what the doctor ordered." And clearly Marvin was the doctor. While he did not participate, Marvin directed the threesome and was elated in his voyeurism dream coming true. He told everyone what he wanted them to do to each other, and Jan was terribly disturbed by this. Engaging with these two strangers while the perverted love of her life cheered them on. Only being high helped her get through this. When the three participants were finished and the couple left, Marvin seemed so pleased. As Jan, downtrodden by what had just happened, was getting dressed, he came to her with a bright smile and said, "You loved it, didn't you?" She said, "Not especially." He said, "Oh dear, don't deny it. You were an animal in heat. You couldn't get enough. This was your dream come true." And she said, "Not my dream, Marvin, yours." Then, of course, the mind games continued. The very next night, the couple came back looking for more action and wanted to do it again, but this time Marvin was less enthusiastic. All the previous excitement he had had all turned into a depressed jealousy. He told Jan, "You can go off with them if you want to. I can't stop you. I won't try." Jan refused them because she never wanted to do any of this in the first place. After she told the couple to leave, Marvin started with his evil mind games, seemingly becoming the real-life Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, when he looked Jan in the face with a deviant smile and said, "To watch purity turn into perversity is a fascinating thing. You were once my angel, and now you have fallen. And yes, I do admit it is exciting to watch you fall." Perhaps if Jan was old enough to recognize this was all emotionally abusive behavior, then maybe she could have gotten out of this tumultuous relationship sooner. Maybe because she already had such an abusive childhood, that's what she had become accustomed to. But her love and need to be with Marvin only caused her more torture. And even Marvin knew this because he said it. He wrote that it was because he loved her too much and it made her miserable. Because Jan had given Marvin so much leeway with exploiting her and setting her up in degrading situations, it increased. Marvin then started trying to pimp her out to his showbiz friends and enemies. The lead singer of the R&B group Maze, Frankie Beverly, was friends with Marvin, and upon introducing him to Jan, who by that time became his wife, Marvin noticed that the two seemed to have a major attraction to each other. After recognizing this, he became relentless, trying to get them to sleep together. He loved steering his young wife into the arms of other men, and he wanted Frankie to be intimate with her just so he could catch them and fly into a rage. It was like he wanted a reason to be jealous and mad at Jan. In his deranged voyeur pursuit, Marvin purposely set them up. He knew Frankie was coming to town to visit, so Marvin offered to pay for his hotel room, but he paid for an adjoining room because he wanted Jan to occupy the other side. Then he told Jan he wanted her out of the house because he wanted to work on music, and he didn't want her to distract him. Jan went to the hotel, and she and Frankie saw each other and decided to hang out in her room. They both felt awkward because Frankie didn't want to hit on his friend's wife, and Jan didn't necessarily want to cheat on Marvin, even though he often did. To overcome the awkwardness, they decided to smoke some pot and chill. Suddenly, Jan heard heavy, rushed footsteps approaching and then banging on her door. She knew it was Marvin. He was yelling for her to open the door. She did, and Frankie had got down on his hands and knees and crawled back into his hotel room and closed the door. Marvin scanned the room and seemed upset to find that Jan was alone. His plan of catching his wife and friend having sex was foiled. Now, as messed up as this setup was, Jan admitted in her book that she and Frankie did eventually meet back up at a later date and did in fact have an affair, but it was on her terms. Not too long after she and Marvin got married, he not only continued the mind games, but he was also trying to make her feel as insecure as possible. He started attacking her looks. By now, she'd had his daughter Nona and his son Frankie, and she was dealing with extreme postpartum depression. So on top of dealing with her post-pregnancy hormones, the man she loved started to make fun of her post-baby's body. He made fun of her sagging breasts. Her new stretch marks turned him off, said that the freckles on her face were way too pronounced now, and that her nose was disproportionate to her face. He told her he loved her but was no longer in love with her, that his passion for her had died. These comments could kill any woman's confidence, but especially a 19, 20-year-old girl. So to feel special and desired again, Jan stepped out on her chaotic marriage. And not only did she keep cheating with Frankie Beverly, but she was now headed towards Marvin's biggest op. Towards the late 70s, there was a new, sexy soul crooner on the block that was said to be Marvin Gaye's replacement, and his name was Teddy Pendergrass. Teddy P had all the women all over the country throwing panties at him with his strong, raspy vocals and sexy bedroom songs. He was giving Marvin Gaye a run for his money, and Marvin became obsessed with him. Teddy had brought out all of Marvin's insecurities, much to the point of Marvin writing a diss song about him called Ego Trippin' Out. After the diss song came out, Jan had gotten a phone call from a man who was interested in taking her out on a date. It was Teddy. He knew she was married to Marvin, but after seeing her, he didn't care and pursued her heavily. This brought Jan's confidence up, and still being hurt and angry with Marvin's lack of love and passion, she took Teddy up on his offer. The two met up at the hotel and partook in cocaine. Teddy made Jan feel beautiful and desired again, leading to a full 2 days and nights of passionate lovemaking. Teddy and Jan started to become bold with their affair as well. Teddy flew her and her children out to Colorado for a family trip in which Frankie called her and showed he didn't approve of her stepping out on him or Marvin. She nor Teddy cared and continued their bold affair. It seemed finally Jan had given Marvin the jealous anger he'd been searching for, because he was stalking both of them. Once they were on a date and Marvin spotted them. He stood outside the restaurant and watched them together. Jan saw him standing there and begged Teddy if they could leave. Teddy, who didn't care about Marvin being there, only left because he didn't want his new side piece to be upset. Jan was afraid of what Marvin would do to them, whereas Teddy bragged about how he didn't care about Marvin and how he didn't fear him like other people seemed to. In other words, Teddy was all the way with the smoke. As you can see, this situationship was more on the lines of the Biggie versus Tupac and Faith Evans dynamic. But with Jan doing things like this, her relationship with Marvin would start to become scarier and far more dangerous. Very recently, the whole world saw the tape of P. Diddy beating on Cassie, who was trying to quietly escape his torture. Unfortunately, while this was the first time we saw this shocking abuse, this wasn't the first time she was harmed by him. Diddy allegedly had a history of viciously putting his hands on women that he supposedly loved. Kim Porter, who he was with for years, was subject to his disgusting violence. Once he'd broken her nose after he found out that she'd cheated on him with his business partner. After doing so, he flew out a plastic surgeon to fix it. Then there were several reports of Diddy beating Cassie and stomping on her. He'd beaten her so bad that the driver of the car had to intervene. He'd even beaten his first baby mother, Misa, so badly that she ran under a car and stayed there to get away from him. Cassie was fortunately able to finally escape this dangerous monster child free, and nothing holds them together. Jan unfortunately had 2 children that kept her there. Marvin was always hell-bent on being angry whether he actually had a reason to be or not. His obsession with Jan and using her for his demented bipolar moods and games came to dangerous heads. One day while they were visiting Hawaii and Maui, Marvin had spent the day getting extremely high on psychedelic mushrooms and coconut. He flew into a blinding rage. He was going on and on about her betrayals and infidelities. He cornered her in the kitchen, picked up a knife, and held it to her throat. High out of his mind and foaming at the mouth, he said, "I love you too much. This love is killing me. Provoke me so that I can put you and me out of our misery." Jan was paralyzed in fear and thought he was really going to take him and her off the face of earth. Fortunately, his rage subsided and he didn't go through with it. But this wasn't the first time his bipolar ways turned scary evil. Another day, while in Maui, Marvin and Jan and their children was on the beach. He and Jan had gotten into an argument and Jan decided she wanted to leave. Marvin grabbed their son Frankie and tried to run away with him. Jan grabbed Frankie's arm and the couple started doing tug-of-war with the small child. Soon Marvin started to beat Jan right there on the beach in front of everyone. It had gotten so bad that the police was called. Marvin was so belligerent that the cops had to put hands on him. Ultimately, Marvin escaped with little Frankie and ran off to Europe. Jan didn't see her son in over a year. Eventually, Jan was reunited with her son and left Marvin, and they divorced in 1982, even though they did reunite in 1983 to try for reconciliation. She went on tour with him when his sexual healing record was a hit. But not too long after their reconciliation, Marvin's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde ways came right back. His raging jealousy and paranoia struck, and he falsely accused Jan of having an affair with his bass player. Then he threw an extremely hot towel in her face, made a pot of boiling hot water, and tried to throw it on her. She moved out of the way in time, but she was close to being scalded. This was the last time she ever dealt with Marvin. She'd finally gotten clean from drugs and put her life back on track. The next year, Marvin Gaye was murdered by his own father. Jan's nightmare was officially over. One of the primary focuses about the Diddy case has been about his sexuality. As we've seen earlier, he has an infatuation with BBCs and has been said to indulge with male prostitutes. It's also been said that he's had fellow male artists in the industry that he's invited to his wild, debaucherous parties to engage in not-so-straight activities with him. Basically, for years, everyone has suspected that Diddy is gay, which in itself isn't wrong, but it's the evilness and degeneracy and abuse of power that he put with it. Allegedly, Diddy has been accused of harming his male lovers as well, and if we're to believe Quincy Jones, supposedly Marvin Gaye was bi as well. Quincy Jones did an interview back in 2018 where he was airing out everyone. He spilled the tea about the legendary actor Marlon Brando and his sexual prowess, how he didn't hesitate to lay anyone or anything down, and that included Richard Pryor and Marvin Gaye. Here's what Quincy Jones said. Marlon Brando used to go cha-cha dancing with us. He could dance his ass off. He was the most charming motherfucker you ever met. He'd fuck anything. He'd fuck a mailbox. James Baldwin, Richard Pryor, Marvin Gaye. This would be no surprise because everyone knows that James Baldwin was gay. Richard Pryor admitted to being bisexual, and then there was Marvin. Other than Quincy spilling this supposed tea, there wasn't really any news about Marvin's alleged attraction to men. But if he did, it would probably be something that ran in the family, seeing that his father was into cross-dressing. Marvin Gaye's real last name is Gaye, but without the E. He added the E when he started his music career because he didn't want anyone to think he was actually into men. Especially because when he was little, he got into many fights because the neighborhood kids would ridicule his father for wearing hair rollers and wearing women's clothes. Maybe this was why Marvin tried to present himself as masculine as possible to distance himself from his father, who he was embarrassed of. Who knows, but just another similarity between Marvin and Diddy. One of the messed up things about all of this is that both of these men essentially got away with this almost scot-free. I mean, everyone knew about their dealings. They had family members, friends, and employees who knew exactly what they were doing, and no one said anything and even kept associating themselves with them. Even though P Diddy is getting called out in the public now, look how long it took to do so. And it is only because of video evidence that his associates are trying to distance themselves from him. Same with Marvin Gaye. Everyone knew what he was doing, and no one called him out about it or involved the law. And with all the messed up things he did, he died being considered and is still considered a legend. Some things never change. So, lurkers, what do you think? Do you think legends from the past should get called out for their past behaviors? Or is all forgiven after death? Let me know down below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Keep on lurking.